Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Brittnee. Today's video is about a cake project that I got hired to do a handful of weeks ago. The project was for an Eras Tour cake and cupcakes. Editing this footage kind of came at a good time because, as you've probably heard, Taylor just released a new album. I also mentioned in my last video that I have an upcoming trip to Sweden, and actually, me and my sister are going to the Eras Tour there. Anyway, if you're usually here for chocolate, you may or may not be interested in this video because today it's all about cake. Within the process of making this cake, I'm going to show you guys a product that I always use now every time I decorate cakes. The product is acrylic cake discs. These discs assist you in frosting your cake nice and smooth and with sharp edges. I love CakeSafe, the company that makes these acrylic discs. You may have seen in previous videos of mine some of their other products. I love their CakeSafe travel box, which allows you to transport cakes. I have a whole video on how I transported a fully decorated wedding cake from Utah to Colorado in the CakeSafe. I also use their spray booth every time I airbrush chocolate bonbons, and it works out so great for what I need just here at home. If you're interested in any of their products, check out their website. They have some cool stuff on there. I have a discount code for you, which is BrittneeK. That discount code will get you 10% off. Just be aware that you can only use it once per customer and it isn't valid for clearance items. All right, let's get into making cakes. I hope that you enjoy watching this process and that you learn something new. So like I mentioned before, I was hired to make a Taylor Swift themed cake. It was for a birthday party where the family was surprising someone with tickets to the Eras Tour in Paris, along with a trip. I decided to do a two-tiered cake to make sure there was enough for everyone to enjoy. For the top tier, I made a vanilla cake, and I will link the recipe that I used in the description if you're interested. So here I'm just finishing up mixing that cake by alternating in the dry ingredients and buttermilk. This method of making cakes has been a total game changer for me. I used to use full cake pans, and the problem with that is that in order to bake more than one at a time, you have to have more than one pan. And cake pans can be kind of expensive. So I've started using pastry rings, and they are so much cheaper and they work great. You can buy sets of like 4 different sizes at a time, and all you do is wrap aluminum foil on the bottom and then spray the whole inside with baking spray. That also cuts out the annoying step of flouring the pans, which I always hated. And when the cakes are done baking, they're so easy to get out and you don't ever run the risk of having the cake stick to the bottom of the pan. Now I'm mixing my chocolate cake. Once again, I'll link the recipe down below for you guys if you want. Most of the cake recipes I use come from Cake by Courtney. She has spent so much time formulating and testing recipes that I don't even bother searching anywhere else. Plus, she lives in Utah like me, so I know that I probably won't have to adjust anything. This chocolate cake is so good. It's really dense and chocolatey. For years, I used the most delicious recipe from Margaret Braun's book, but one day it just really stopped working for me. Has that ever happened to you guys? A recipe works great forever and then suddenly it doesn't? It's super annoying. But this is a great replacement. It's a very similar recipe to the one I used to use. For the chocolate layer, my bottom tier, I'm using 8-inch pastry rings. In pastry school, my classmates and I used to ask our teacher, how long do we bake it? Because that was never written in our recipes. And he always just looked at us with a straight face and said, until it's done. So bake it until it's done. Once the cakes are done baking, I like to let them cool for about 30 minutes. Then I just carefully take a knife around the cake to make sure it has released from the ring. Then you just slide the ring off and gently peel the foil from the bottom of the cake. Once the cakes are out, I put them in the fridge until I'm ready to stack them because chilled cakes are easier to work with. After the cakes have been in the fridge long enough to get cold, I slice them. I don't use any special tools or anything for this. I like to eyeball it with a serrated knife. First, I slice off the top down to the point where the cake has a straight edge. Then by that point, it is usually the perfect height to just slice the cake layer in half. I like to hold my knife in place using my hand resting on the counter to keep my mark. And then I just spin the cake once around first to create a guide. After I have a line to follow, I just keep spinning, and once the cut is deep enough into the cake, it's easy to just follow your knife through to cut across the middle of the cake. While the cakes continue to chill in the fridge, I make all my fillings. I'm starting with a raspberry sauce. I didn't use a recipe for this. I always just wing raspberry sauce. I think I put 2 cartons of raspberries in a pot and like a 1/4 cup of sugar. Then I heat the mixture until the raspberries break down and get really juicy and a little bit thick. Then I just strain the sauce out. If you want the sauce even thicker, you can heat it more after straining it and even add some cornstarch, but I didn't this time because I liked it as it was. Next, I make dark chocolate ganache. I actually have a video on this on my channel. You can check out in this card or the description if you're interested. I like to adjust the recipe that I use for ganache depending on what it's for. The ratio I've come to like best for cakes so that it doesn't get too hard in the fridge is equal parts chocolate and heavy cream. Before I stack the chocolate cake, I quickly mix up some buttercream. This is just a pretty standard American buttercream. I'll link my recipe below as well. I've been using a new stacking method the past couple cakes and I think I like it. I'm not totally sold that it's necessary yet. You take some acetate from a ring and wrap it around the bottom layer of the cake. Then you layer everything inside and the acetate kind of helps to keep things straight and contained. For this chocolate cake, I do an outside border in buttercream because the whole cake will be frosted using buttercream. I use the dark chocolate ganache and raspberry sauce for the cake filling. As you can see, this filling isn't super thick, so this chocolate cake is more dense and fudgy, and the raspberry adds a nice fruity and sour pop. One thing that I do like about this method is that the acetate allows you to press the layers down pretty firmly while still keeping a nice shape to your cake to make sure all your cake and fillings settle before you frost and stack them. Now moving on to the filling for the vanilla cake. This is a vanilla mousse. It's super easy to make. I think I have a similar recipe I'll link down below. I use this recipe as a base to make any flavor. The mousse starts out with cream cheese and then I just added vanilla for the flavoring. It's a nice thick and creamy mousse and works great for cake fillings. One part I don't like about the acetate method is that it makes filling the cake more difficult on the lower layers because it's sometimes hard to reach down in there. So for this cake, I start the stack without the acetate. Once again, I'm building the outside down with buttercream and then filling the inside with vanilla mousse and a variety of berries. Again, after my last cake layer, I press down to encourage all the fillings and frosting and cake layers to settle together and into the fridge to get really chilly. Once my cakes are stacked, I usually like to put them in the fridge overnight because I like them to be super cold, as well as the buttercream fully set up so that nothing moves when I frost the outside. Now on to the decorations. I make some isomalt butterflies to represent the Lover era along with the Taylor Swift debut album. If you're curious on how to make these yourself or any other isomalt shape using a silicone mold, check out the video in the card or description. I have a tutorial on these cute butterflies. Next, I work on some elements from the Midnights era. All of these are made out of modeling chocolate. I usually make my own modeling chocolate, which is really easy to do, but you just need to be sure to make it like a day ahead of using it. I have a video with my recipe and instructions, and I'll link that below. But anyway, I did a wedding cake a while back that I covered in modeling chocolate instead of fondant, so I needed a lot of it, but I didn't want to make all of that from scratch. So I actually bought a tub of modeling chocolate, and it's really amazing. I will say it was pretty expensive, and I ended up with way more than I needed. But it has really come in handy, and that is what I'm using for all of these cake decorations. I'll link the brand that I bought below for you guys in case you're curious. Anyway, to represent Midnights, I had to, of course, make some cute letter beads that spelled out happy birthday for a little friendship bracelet decoration. And then I wanted to also make a cute little clock to use somewhere in the cake topper. The letters for the beads and numbers for the clock are drawn on with an edible marker. I can't remember where I got these, but I'll try to find them and link them in the description. Now I just make a couple more small decorations to represent some other albums, a little green snake for Reputation, a scarf for Red, and a paper airplane for 1989. I wanted the color scheme to somewhat match, so I adjusted the colors to all kind of match the opening of the Eras Tour, which is Lover and a bit more pastel-y. And I didn't make a ton of handmade decorations because I didn't have a ton of time to finish this cake, so I supplemented with some cake elements that I ordered on Amazon, you'll see later. here is my favorite part, taking the acetate off of the cake. It's definitely more fun if you spin it off. Okay, now to explain how to use the acrylic cake discs. You'll place your chilled and stacked cake on top of one disc and center it. And there are a couple of ways to use the top disc. I'll first explain how I did it in this video and then tell you a couple of other options that you can try out. So I first pipe a wall of buttercream around the top edge. Then I place the acrylic disc on top of the buttercream, centered. Then I use my little level to make sure the top of the cake will be level. I just adjust the disc by pressing it down into the buttercream until everything is level. Once I'm satisfied, I fill in the sides with frosting. You can use a piping bag here or just a spatula, whichever you like best. Once it's filled in, you just spin it with your cake scraper using the top and bottom acrylic discs as guides to keep everything at a 90-degree angle and very smooth and straight. Once you even out your outer layer down to the discs, you'll be able to see spots where you didn't have enough frosting, or you'll find little bubbles. You can just take a little offset spatula and add more frosting there and then scrape again. A couple tips for scraping to get things smooth that I found work out good for me. Don't press super hard. You really want to use the scraper to glide across the frosting and not cut into it or press too hard so that you move the discs at all. I find that holding the scraper at an angle that's almost flat against your curve works well. That also helps smooth rather than scrape. And then another thing that I do that works good for me is heat up my scraper with my heat gun at the very end to really make things smooth. You can also warm up your scraper with hot water, which does basically the same thing. That warmth melts the butter just a little bit and helps things glide a bit more. After I'm happy with the frosting, I put the cake in the freezer for just like 15 to 30 minutes. While my first cake sets up, I frost my second cake. Adding a little roll of tape at the bottom of the acrylic disc definitely helps the cake not slide off of your cardboard cake round as you frost it. Now I'll tell you the two other ways that you can use the top disc. But first I'll start with one thing that you definitely don't want to do, which is apply full frosting onto the top of the cake and then stick down the disc straight onto the frosting. Because once the frosting sets up, you will not be able to get the acrylic disc off and you will most likely crack your buttercream trying to get it off. Ask me how I know. So actually the reason I just do a little frosting wall to start is to give the disc some gap from the cake where the frosting will go. But the wall is thin enough, I can put a knife through it when it's time to pull off the disc. The next method you can use is that you can apply frosting to the full top of the cake as smooth as you can. Then you take a round piece of parchment paper, the exact same size as your disc, and you can kind of use a little bit of buttercream frosting to glue it to your acrylic cake disc. Then put the disc and the parchment paper right on top of the frosting and press it down a little. With this method, you're using the disc to help smooth out your top frosting, and the parchment paper prevents the disc from sticking. The problem I found with this method is that when you go to fill the corners of the cake, it's really hard to not accidentally get frosting in between the edge of the piece of parchment and the disc, so then things can get a little messy. And you can have parchment paper kind of getting stuck if you're not careful. The last method that I've seen and haven't tried myself, but I think would work pretty good, is to wrap the disc in plastic wrap, frosting the whole top of the cake, place it down and press it smooth, then do the whole method like normal. Once the frosting sets up in the fridge or freezer, you can unwrap the disc from the top, take the disc off, and then gently peel the plastic wrap off of the cake. And then if you have any wrinkles or anything, you just fill them in with more frosting. Anyway, different decorators prefer to use the discs in different ways. I've seen all of these ways work well for people. I don't make cakes that much anymore, so I haven't experimented enough to decide which method I like best yet. All right, for the top tier, I did a bit of pastel watercolor frosting. I actually was running out of buttercream and wasn't fully happy with my smoothing job, but I knew I'd be adding decorations, so I moved along. Now here's the second part to the process. My first cake is chilled and I run a knife along the top edge as close to the disc as I can so I get a clean cut. There are two downfalls that I found using this method. The first is that your cake isn't fully frosted, so you have to fill in the top after you take off the disc. The second is that cutting the disc off can sometimes cause cracking if your buttercream wall got too thick by pressing it down, but it seems to work pretty well. So once the disc is cut off, I just add in a pile of frosting, and smoothing out the top is super easy because the other frosting is cold and you can kind of just follow the straight lines by pressing against the chilled frosting. Also, the top of the cake doesn't need to be as perfect or smooth as the sides because it'll have another cake stacked on top of it. To remove the bottom disc, you do the same thing by gently cutting it off with a knife. If you're having trouble, you can heat up your knife as well, then just carefully lift the cake off. Now it's time to stack and decorate the cakes. You'll notice I used large straws for support inside the cake, a little buttercream as glue, then just gently placed on the top tier. Does anyone else besides me think that the way I frosted the top tier cake looks like Play-Doh ice cream? The best. Add some borders and the decorations, and the Taylor Swift Eras Tour cake is done. I had to drive this cake 1.5 hours away for delivery, so of course I used my CakeSafe. It honestly is the best thing ever. I don't worry about the cake at all when I'm driving. So the funny story with this project is that I was first hired for the cake. The family loved it so much that they said they wanted me to make another cake with the same theme for another Taylor Swift party that they were having the next week for a group of kids. So I suggested cupcakes instead of a cake, and they loved that idea. So I made 4 cupcakes for each era. All right, guys, that's today's video. I hope that you liked it. You'll have to let me know down in the comments below if you're a Taylor Swift fan. If you are, comment below your favorite album or era. And if you've listened to the new album, let me know what your new favorite song is. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, today's the day. If you'd like to see something else that's sweet, just click on one of these thumbnails. Thanks so much for watching today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.